So hello and welcome to our panel, Ray Harryhausen, Preserving the Legacy of a Titan. My name's Connor Heaney and I'm the Collections Manager for the Ray and Diana Harryhausen Foundation. And I'm joined today by one of our trustees, John Walsh. Hello, John.
Hello, good to be here and great to be back at Comic Con at home. It's very exciting. It's great to be speaking to all of you around the world.
Yeah, very exciting and a good time for us to make this particular presentation as we reflect on Ray's centenary year and start to look towards the future of Ray's collection as well. Ray Harryhausen established the foundation in 1986, showing a lot of foresight, and the primary purpose of the foundation is to maintain and, where necessary, restore his incredible archive. The archive of creatures, artworks, molds, tools, books, and so much more. And John, you met and worked with Ray in the 1980s, shortly after the foundation was established, I suppose. And you were able to meet with some of the creatures in person at that time as well. What did you feel Ray's approach was to the sort of maintenance of his collection?
Well, when I first met Ray in the late 1980s, there's me looking much younger back in film school days. Creatures like the Kraken didn't need much in the way of restoration. This is less than 10 years after Clash of the Titans. It was about 10 years, 1989, I think I shot this. So it was less about, I think, preservation at that point, but more about a collective and keeping things together. And I think other people who see the Harryhausen collection think of foresight in terms of, oh, it's film props, which they are. You know, they're props that we use models as part of film. Most people never kept them together as a collective. So I think Ray's initial thought was about the technique, his animation technique, and the collection as a whole, you know, keeping it all as a collective. And then, of course, as the 80s went into the 90s and noughties, it became obvious that to exhibit these pieces, they need much more than just maintaining. They'd actually need a full restoration. So, of course, there is a difference between just maintaining a collection and keeping it in its current state, and then it is to restore something. And sometimes it can be quite controversial, can't it, Connor, about should you restore something and should you not? And we've taken a unique approach. We have a kind of before and after approach here, don't we?
Yes, that's right. And I think we sort of, our philosophy at the foundation has been made a lot easier by having Ray's express letter of wishes for what he wanted to happen to the creature collection. So there's no ambiguity. We know that he wanted the creatures to look as good as they did on screen. So as well as all of the reference material that we have for that, we are lucky, very lucky, to have a conservator on board who worked very closely with Ray. His name is Alan Friswell, and he worked alongside Ray to take part in this sort of initial restoration project. Now, what's invaluable about that is that Alan was also able to spend hour after hour, chatting to Ray, discussing techniques, the types of tools he would be using, the types of polymers and latex which he would be applying to the models. And I think it's important at this point to explain that that Ray's models have, in some cases, deteriorated due to the very nature of latex. It's an organic material. It does slowly degrade over time. And as we'll see, some models deteriorate faster than others. But this gave Alan a wonderful opportunity to spend hour after hour sitting with Ray and talking about different scenarios that he may encounter as a restorer, different bits and pieces that may be used and different decisions that maybe need to be made in the future.
Look, let's hear from Alan Friswell himself, who is a relatively young man, actually. I think when we discuss him working with Ray, people think he's going to be a person in senior years, and of course he's not. Let's have a chat or look inside the Hydra from Jason and the Argonauts.
Well, obviously I'd only seen it before in photographs and in the film. In real life, it's perhaps even more impressive than it was in the film. The detail work is incredible. It's shockingly well made. It's just an amazing piece of work. The delicacy of the detail work around the heads is quite amazing. It's almost microscopically detailed. It's obviously necessary, all those models were, because on the screen they're so huge. They have to be very complex in their construction, so they appear huge on the screen. You don't give away the fact they're actually miniatures. But this one in particular is amazingly well made. The detail work is so complex. And 7 heads, I mean, all with the same degree of complexity of detail, the same beauty of the sculpture. It's pretty amazing. Well, it would seem likely that the heads were made separately, like from the same original sculpture. One sculpture was made, a mould was made, and then 7 duplicates were made from that and then attached to the body. It wouldn't make a great deal of sense to make this from one single mould, because it would be much more straightforward to attach the heads separately. But then the question comes up, are the heads all cast from the same mould, or are they sculpted individually? We won't know until we get into look at the thing more closely. If it's made individually, then it's even a more incredible piece of work than we thought. But that's the great fun of examining these models. Well, it's difficult because many people now do work in stop motion. They will use frame grabbers, where you can look at a video monitor and you can see where you've been. You can see where the model has been. You can see all the previous frames, and you can work out where you're going to go. Ray didn't have anything like that. He used surface gauges, which was a calibration device which you could a pointer that you could attach to, say, a horn or a beak. And when you move the model, the pointer stays where it is, so you know how far you've gone with the model. And that's as far as Ray was able to go with being able to calibrate all this and to calculate where he's going to be and where he's been, and knowing. It must have been a nightmare. It's a very special skill to be able to animate just one thing, but something of this sort, of this degree of complexity. It must have been a nightmare, but then of course Ray took it on himself to do it, didn't he? So he must have got some fun from it, I suppose. Well, we can't really animate it anymore. I mean, that's a given thing with all of Ray's figures. They're too fragile. The rubber is starting to, like, I wouldn't say solidify, but dry to an extent where if you started pulling it around, pieces would fall off. Although some parts of the neck still are flexible. It's not completely rigid. There appear to be some cracks on the neck. Other than that, it's in amazingly good condition. The heads are still in one piece. There are very few. There's a beak here, which tiny pieces come away. But outside of cracks, unless we discover something radical that we've not seen yet, it's consider it's 1963. That's, what's that, 54 years ago? That's pretty amazing. Well, Ray always said it was it was just luck. The batch of latex that he was using, the batch of foam rubber, that whether one batch would be better than another, be superior. But the odd thing is possible that he used the same foam for this that he would have used for Talos, because the models were all being made at the same time. And if that's the case, then it is a mystery as to why one model would deteriorate more badly than another. Particularly this because the necks are quite slender. And again, this is the problem with slender parts of the model, particularly those that are animated a lot, because the rubber will then be stressed in that area. But again, considering the age of the model, there's very, very little damage. There's very minimal damage. So it's an amazing thing to have in front of us.
And a fascinating thing there, Connor, is that the Hydra hasn't needed much TLC. And there's some speculation, as Alan said in the video, about the chemical mix being right, but a little bit spooky. Some of the naughty evil creatures, like Medusa, haven't needed as much TLC as some of the good guys. A little bit spooky, that.
Yeah, it is astounding with the Hydra just how well it had survived over the years. And that was a breathtaking moment when Alan assisted me in removing the Hydra from its lair to conduct that restoration. If every model was in that kind of condition, we'd have a lot less work on our hands.
Yes, so should we kick off with the next one? The next one's going to be the Kraken, which in Nordic myth, of course, was an octopus. They're not very interesting. But in the Harryhausen reinterpreted world or reimagined world, he's sort of a cross between a lizard and a monkey. Let's take a look.
Well, model animation is basically the same principle as the animated cartoon, only instead of using flat drawings, you have a model such as this. In each frame of film, you have to change the position of the model. You have to move it very slightly. You have to move the eyes, the nose, the mouth, the arms, many different parts of the body.
Well, the Ray and Diana Harryhausen Foundation looks after the creature collection from Ray Harryhausen's films, and we've been working here with the university not only to preserve Ray's legacy and the creatures themselves, but to get in-depth scans to find out what went on beneath the skin of some of these sort of monstrous creations. So there's lots of applications here. It's not just making a photocopy or a replica or even a 3D print. Scans not only show us the way that Ray Harryhausen worked and his sort of working practices and how he put the armatures together, but also it protects the creature collection. It means students of animation can come and have a look inside, something they would never have been able to have done before.
Through exhibitions and through our public speaking programme, we share as much information as possible about the collection and about Ray's work, and these scans and these x-rays are providing a new insight into what Ray was actually doing.
So normally filmmaking is a passive experience, you watch the creatures and the film ends. But now for the first time you're going to be able to go inside the creatures and perhaps manipulate them yourselves. Whether that's through an app or through a computer program, you may be able to animate one of Ray Harryhausen's creatures.
Well, the main issue really was just the surface area that had to be covered. Same kind of techniques as with the other models, but it's the biggest model really so far, I think. And quite a lot of work. The only other model that was similar in size would have been the Hydra, but the Hydra had much less work that needed. It was far better condition. So yeah, it was the size of the model really, as well as the complexity of much of the work that had to be done, that was the issue, I think. Well, yeah, I mean, originally the claws were actually quite light coloured, so I've tried to retain that colour. Also, I made them glossy to look like real claws, like animal claws. It all adds to the final finish of the model and makes it as effective as possible. Well, it's very satisfying when the paint goes on, when the actual final colouring, which in itself is a coating that protects the model against the atmosphere and against light to a certain extent. But it's always nice to see it all come together. And it is complicated because it has to be completely recoloured. And there are lots of subtleties, elements in the face. There are kind of different points on the body that have to be, some are reds, some are greens, all sorts of different tones that are brought in to give it a sense of organic reality, to try and really copy what was there originally, to try and bring it back to the status of the model as it was back in 1981. Well, this is really what the whole purpose of what we're trying to do, is that to make sure that Ray's legacy is protected as much as possible, and this is through his models and the work that he did. And so yes, obviously the fact that models are this old and older than this as well are able to be seen by new generations of people is great for all of us. It's a great thing to be able to do, and I hope Ray would have been happy with that.
Fascinating again, Connor, because you have the 3D scans that you worked with the Manchester Metropolitan University to achieve, and there's clips there for my film as well that I made back in the day. So the Kraken, a real favourite with fans.
Yeah, that's going to say there, the Kraken is a model you have a long history with, and one that we have done, I suppose, the largest variety of work upon. And I think it's important that we are assessing these models in as many different ways as possible. We're using the same kind of techniques that Ray would have used really with Alan. Alan is really the kind of ongoing practitioner of the type of techniques that Ray would be using to prepare his models had he still been here. But then we're using cutting edge technology, such as with our scanning project with the Reanimate team in Manchester. And that gives a very unique insight into the condition of the models and their interiors. I did ask Vanessa, Ray's daughter, what she thought her father would have made of all this technology that's being used to examine the models. And I think you know, John, from working with Ray, he was fascinated by sort of cutting edge technology and different ways of looking at things.
Yeah, he was. I mean, the films were restored in HD in his lifetime, and so he was very interested in that technology. There was the colorization of some of his black and white films created, and he was very interested in 3D as well and retrofitting 3D. So he was very much a technical innovator. And although the technique itself is from the past, Ray advanced stop motion photography, miniature rear projection, and all of the other techniques to combine live action with animation. So he was always looking for the next tool. So I think had he worked through the 80s and into the 90s, he would have embraced motion control, which is a way of a computer memorizing the movements of the camera, so that there would have been some camera movement in some of the animations he would have created. But I should make a point that we talk here a lot about the creature restorations, and I touched on it briefly there. Sony Pictures and Warner Brothers, who have the MGM catalog, or did at the time of recording this, who knows what's happening with streaming services, all of Ray's films have been restored in HD. So the original film elements are very safely looked after by all the representative studios. So we're very pleased not to have to do that as well, Connor, aren't we?
Yes, the movies themselves do not belong to us, but the likes of Sony Pictures have done some wonderful work in recent years in creating 2K and 4K Blu-rays. And I know that fans worldwide have loved seeing Ray's films in as high definition as possible. And there's always a big demand for them as well. They always tend to sell out quite quickly and can be quite hard to get your hands on, which again, I think is testament to how wonderful these films were in the first place. And touching there on something you said earlier about the photography, a lot of the images you'll see today were taken by Andy Johnson, who's a photographer who's now captured most, if not all, of the creature collection. One of the wonderful things about his photographs is that he took them whilst Ray was still alive. And again, Ray would sit with them and watch him capturing the collection. And I know that Ray was fascinated by the software that Andy used to change the lighting, the likes of Photoshop to alter images after they'd been taken. And Andy told me that Ray had commented, I wish we'd had that back in the 1950s when I was making the Seventh Voyage of Sinbad and all of these other films, because things were a lot trickier in Ray's day.
Yes, they were. I mean, at laboratories, there was very little latitude in changing colour and brightness and so on. And you had to shoot day for night at the time on the day, rather than create that sort of illusion at the nighttime illusion in the laboratory in post-production. Now, you mentioned Golden Voyage of Sinbad there by accident, but it's up next after the decay of the Kraken. We're now into the decay of Carly. Let's take a look at what Alan had to contend with.
Yes, it's more fragile than probably anything we've actually dealt with before. The latex has actually deteriorated from inside. We've had this with some of the models, but this is probably the most extreme example. It's very fragile, and if you put any pressure on any part of the model, it'll actually turn into powder. So this is undoubtedly the most delicate thing we've come across yet. It may be that the latex wasn't quite up to the standard of the other models. That sometimes happened with Ray's figures, but also the model went through so much in the film. She comes to life, comes down the stairs, her arms are always moving, she does a dance, and then of course she grows 6 swords from her hands and there's a huge fight with Sinbad and 2 of his men. So she probably did more on screen than any other creature in that film, really, and went through an awful lot of manipulation, and of course that does fatigue the foam latex, and it can cause the model to deteriorate perhaps a bit more rapidly than some of the others. It's practically every part of the model. I can't really, looking at it, see any part of the model that doesn't need some kind of attention. The arms, again, a couple of the arms have practically crumbled away to nothing. The face needs stuff happening to it, it needs repair on the nose. The body's covered in cracks, pieces missing from all over. The toes are missing, all of the fingers have to be replaced, so that's 30 fingers and thumbs that have to be rebuilt. And the whole model, there are cracks and bits and pieces missing all over the figure. It's probably the most damaged of all of Ray's models so far, I think. Similar to the other stuff that I've been using, but this is a liquid form. It's like it has the consistency of water, but this has the property of actually dissolving. It absorbs into the structure of the model itself. So it actually it binds the molecules together from inside. So whereas it was very crumbly now and extremely delicate in terms of touching it, when the treatment's been applied, it'll be very solid and it'll be much more manoeuvrable. You can actually be able to pick it up without too much trouble. And of course the restoration work that comes after that, the rebuilding of the parts that are missing, will be much more straightforward. Yeah, well, the first stage is to coat it with this material that will soak into the actual substance, and that will stabilise the whole thing. Then it will be restored as the other models have been, with actual resculpturing of different bits and pieces. Then it'll be coated again with a polymer coating that will protect it, but also gives it its original colour back as well. I saw a clip of it on TV. I saw it in a re-release, and I saw a clip as an interview with Ray, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I thought it was incredible, and it has a magical feel to it. It looks so authentic as a kind of Indian statue. It looks very, very, very believable. It's very accurate looking, and there was a magical quality to it. The synchronisation of the arms, the way it would move, it was just an incredible piece of animation, and I think that was one of the reasons why the film was so successful, because of that particular sequence in the movie. And as a kid, I remember, again, like so many of Ray's models, trying to build this modern plasticine. And I always remember particularly trying to get the bracelets right on the arms, to try and get those as accurate as I could, and getting the necklaces correct with the details and everything. So obviously sitting here with the real model is an incredible experience for me.
Now that really blows apart the myth that the bad creatures have lasted longer, because Kali is, of course, much younger than the Hydra, and Kali, she was in real need of rescuing, Connor, wasn't she?
Yes, Kali was one of the creatures where, honestly, when I saw Kali, I felt this is a model which will never be displayed again, because it was so fragile even to touch, let alone remove from its container and display for long periods of time. And I was astounded by the job that Alan did on Kali. As he mentioned in the video there, it had the consistency of an oxo cube, and that's no exaggeration. I mean, this again goes back to the Foundation's kind of philosophy with regards to restoration. Had we not intervened with Kali, exhibitions or no exhibitions, had we just decided to leave Kali as she was, eventually one day we would have been presented with a box full of dust and an armature. You know, the model would eventually have crumbled completely, and that would have been a tragedy, really, because Kali is one of the most popular creatures in cinema history and deserves to be preserved for future generations to enjoy.
And probably one of the tastiest creatures. I can imagine if you and I were on Mysterious Island, then we'd certainly be tucking down to some lovely boiled crab, wouldn't we? Let's take a look at what Alan had to contend with.
Well, it's, again, slightly different from any other of Ray's models, because of course you're dealing with a real shell. It's not sculpted, it's not cast in rubber or resin. It's actually a real shell, chitinous material, which is the same as insect shells to a certain extent. It's calcium carbonate, which is bone material in effect. And so from a sculpture point of view, it's a tricky thing to replicate, because of course hopefully the work is reasonably invisible, or at least not that apparent. So it's a tricky thing to sculpt new material, to actually replicate what is original organic material, and to paint it as well, to colorise it to match the original. So it was tricky, but a fascinating thing to work on. Yes, very much. It was known that Ray drilled holes through the sides of each of the legs to stabilise them with the wire that went through the base of the animation table. And those holes are very visible, you actually see those. And so I've cleaned those out so that they can actually be seen by anyone who wants to look closely enough. There is also a wire in the side of one of the claws for stabilisation by a wire from above. Ray used an aerial brace, because the model was rather too top heavy to support itself on the animation table. There's also a hole in the back of the shell through which a wire was also pulled through to stabilise from above. In the left claw, there are two holes drilled through the base of the claw, in which the tiny model of Dan Jackson as Neb was actually secured through wires through the claw, through the animation figure, and back through the claw again. And I found those, it was very interesting to see that. So it's an interesting sort of detective story, really, to actually, while restoring a model, to find all of these bits and pieces that Ray put in so many years ago, to actually see it how it come to life on the screen. Well, it's an adaptable process. The material it can be solid, it can be flexible, you can be rubberized if you wish. so it retains mobility. But the real trick is that it can be solidified, it can be soft, and so the trick is to sculpt a material that really suits the needs of the individual model. If it's an organic model, if it's a dinosaur, for example, you may have to sculpt scaly skin to replicate the texture of the model. If it's an organic, like a creature, like a humanoid creature, you're building muscles and skin texture looks like a human being. If it's an animal like a crab, for example, in this case, the sculpture has to replicate the effect of crab shell. So it's always a difficult thing, it's always a tricky process. And each model has its own needs. Each time we go out with this, it's a different thing we have to do. And hopefully it works out okay on each time we actually do one of these things.
Now, the crab is unusual in a sense because the crab was a crab already. Ray didn't create that crab, much like the squirrel in The Three Worlds of Gulliver. The crab was purchased from the food hall at Harrods, and it's looking in splendid condition.
Yes, again, I wasn't sure how Alan was going to approach the crab because it is crab shell, it's not a latex model. Through some wonderful disguise work, I guess, the new latex pieces which were used to replace any missing parts now blend in seamlessly. And again, it must be the world's most famous crab. I believe it was chosen as one of the unsung heroes during our top 10 Harryhausen creature poll last year. And fantastic to see the crab still inspiring menace 60 years on.
So last up, we're going to look at the prototype for the Selenite from First Men in the Moon. And this is fascinating because he didn't make it on screen. So he's very much a backroom boy, this prototype. And yet he's got a real kind of 50s sci-fi saucer invasion look and feel about it. And it would have been great if he'd been there in the background, kind of doing a bit of a wave. I recently saw The Phantom Menace on 4K and noticed, of course, there's some ETs in the background in the Parliament sequence on Coruscant. And, it would have been nice to have seen our prototype Selenite maybe waving the sphere off at the end when they're all doomed on the moon. But let's see what Alan had to contend with.
So, Alan, you've just finished restoring a model. Can you tell us what particular piece you've been working on this week?
Well, this is the prototype model of one of the Selenites from First Men in the Moon, which was finally released in 1963. Ray designed and built this figure. It was intended to be the primary design for the Selenite characters, but it was rejected because Ray, I think, thought it was a bit too macabre looking, a bit too scary. It does look a little bit like a kind of B-movie monster, and so Ray chose to go for the more insect-like, slender characters that you can actually see in the film.
Now you've completed restoration, as we can see. This was a piece that was created in the early 1960s. Can you tell us a little bit about how the model had deteriorated over the last decades?
Well, like so many of Ray's figures, the model is a foam latex material. It has a ball and socket joint armature inside. It's actually functional as an animation model. And over time, sadly, the foam rubber part of the figure rots away. The atmosphere gets to it and heat gets to it. And various sections around the joints had crumbled and fallen away. The feet had basically, they were basically gone. The feet had to be replaced. Areas of around the knees, again around the joint areas, had actually dried out and crumbled, and they had to be restored.
So what techniques did you use to restore this piece, and what kind of materials did you use to replace any missing parts?
Well, it's a polymer acrylic mixture. It's very compatible with the original materials with which the model was made. It blends in very well with foam latex and latex rubber and all sorts of different materials that have polymer content as a chemical constituent that is very friendly to this material, and it's sculpted directly onto the figure to replace those parts that have rotted away or disappeared entirely, and it's basically applied directly to and sculpted, and then it actually blends with it joins in effect with the original material, and it becomes part of the original model.
Wonderful.
Now, we've exhibited the prototype, Connor, haven't we?
Yes, that's right. And that we included this today because the prototype Selenite is quite an unusual creature in a way, because I mean, you wrote an entire book on the subject about Ray Harryhausen's lost movies, but Ray would often design creatures and they would change, later as the film sort of began to be made, or he would sketch creatures or even build clay sculptures of potential creatures. But to build an armature and to build a fully animatable model for a design which wasn't eventually used, I think is quite interesting. I don't know if that happened again. And there we have it. So it's important to display the prototype Selenite to show some of the different ideas that Ray had over the years. A lot of work went into the stop motion creatures for First Men in the Moon, and it's great to see all of those different creatures looking good and restored for the new millennium.
As you rightly said, Connor, you can see more about that in my book, Harryhausen, The Lost Movies. And we spoke at Comic-Con about that a couple of years ago when the book first came out. You find lots more in there about sequences and scenes that didn't make it to Ray's films. And it's fascinating because there is a wealth of material in there in terms of what could have been, what should have been, and what may be in the future. Who knows? So the unmade Harryhausen films could be coming your way to a streaming service near you soon. So that would be very exciting. So what have we got next, Connor? You're going to update people on what else is happening.
Well, that's it. That's a good segue, John, because that sort of touches upon some of the other work that we're doing in the archive. Of course, the creature restorations are some of the most important work that we've carried out over the last few years, but there's been a lot of research into publications, and the Foundation has had 3 different books out in the last 4 years. There's been Harryhausen, the movie posters. There's been your Harryhausen, The Lost Movies. And then, of course, Vanessa Harryhausen's book, Ray Harryhausen, Titan of Cinema, each of which has delved into Ray's archive from a different angle, allowing us to explore different corners of Ray's life and of his incredible creative work over the years.
Absolutely. Of course, Vanessa's book recently won the Rondo Hassan Award for Book of the Year, quite rightly so. So well done, Vanessa. I was a nominee last year. I was a nominee this year with Flash Gordon as well. So always the bridesmaids. People say to me, always the bridesmaid. I'm like, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? But yes, unfortunately, yes, always the bridesmaid.
Just keep writing books, John. Yeah.
Well, I don't know if I'm allowed to do this, but I can flash that book, which is the Flash Gordon book, and my new one, which is Escape from New York, which is available to pre-order. But we're not here to talk about those books. We're here to talk about Harryhausen. But the vastness of the archive means that we can do things like the podcast with audio clips from Ray, the audio commentaries we've got that are recorded, and of course we get fan contributions, don't we, Connor? You get things sent to you all the time because it's a hub. People know where to come. They come to the foundation because they think, I have something of interest, I have a story to share. Or in recent cases, people have come with props from films and said, look, I had a relative who worked on a Sinbad or a Jason and so on. And I think that's wonderful, and with the exhibition in Scotland and Vanessa's award-winning book that accompanies it, it's great because it raises the profile. And sometimes people contact us who are not directly connected with the world of Ray Harryhausen, but are connected to the world of special effects or with stop motion animation. So we're great fans of and great friends of Cosgrove Hall, their archive, and they did all the wonderful animations through Thames Television for Wind in the Willows and so on, lots of great children's programs. So I think there's a real appetite now to revisit the past.
Yeah, I think Ray was very fond of the metaphor of the snowball. It's kind of rolling down through the years and getting bigger and bigger. And it feels like we have a kind of similar cycle in place where the more we delve into the archive, the more discoveries we make, the more people that we come into contact with. We're building up this huge overview of Ray's career, his decades-long career and all of the different work and his prolific nature. And it does lead us to have like one of the most comprehensive animation archives in the world, all of which is being fed into our AdLib database, which is a sort of professional collections management system as used by the likes of the Academy and the BFI. And what we're able to do now with a bit of hindsight and consolidation is make those links between things like Ray's lost movies, or maybe some of the more personal stories that Vanessa told in her book, some of the finds in the archive, some of those things that are hidden away, sketches and ideas by Ray that which kind of tell a wider story about his incredible creative work.
Absolutely, you know, and we want to hear from the fans. You know, we get lots of great feedback from our podcast series. We're very excited that we've now become a vodcast as well, haven't we, Connor? So you can see us rabbiting on as well as listen to us rabbiting on. And this year, of course, it's the 40th anniversary of Clash of the Titans. And for many people, it's not only their favourite Ray Harryhausen film, but it's their favourite film. And we're going to be doing something very special for that. So listen out for that. So that's coming up quite soon because we're in the anniversary year. So in what would be Ray's 101st birthday, we have a very special announcement to make. And it's this: we are creating a Ray Harryhausen Film Award. And it's going to be announced now. So if you go onto our website, you'll be able to see all of the details for the award. It'll be given to approximately half a dozen animation categories: Best Feature Animation, Best Student, Best Television, Best Children's. There'll be a Hall of Fame award there as well. And we are looking for innovation, we are looking for stop motion, and we are looking for applications, aren't we, Connor? Because we're running the award ourselves at the foundation.
That's right. The inaugural awards will take place and be announced on June 29th, 2022. So you have the best part of a year to prepare your entries. And it's important, I think, for us to keep as that metaphor again, is keep the snowball rolling. Ray would have been delighted to know that animators continue to be inspired by his work. And the 6 different categories cover a wealth of different fields. So if you're an animator and you're interested in entering the Ray Harryhausen Awards, check out our website and social media. It should be very interesting. I can't wait to see the applications and the entries coming in. I'm sure there'll be a wealth and a variety of different talents on display.
And of course, if you're a film student or you're a film school administrator or you're a producer of animation, you know, this is for you as well. So, you know, get your projects in, get your titles in, and try and be a winner of the very first Ray Harryhausen Animation Award. It won't be the last. The awards will be here long after everyone else has gone home. So, you know, get in now.
Now, this year would have been Ray Harryhausen's 100th birthday. As we mentioned, one of the celebrations for that was the publication of Vanessa's book, Ray Harryhausen, Titan of Cinema. There's also a major exhibition of the same name taking place in Edinburgh as we speak. Now, originally the exhibition was due to run for 3 months. It's now running until February of 2022. And it's the largest and widest ranging exhibition of Ray's work ever seen. And we've got some photography of that exhibition on screen now. We certainly hope that the exhibition will be able to tour in future years. Obviously, we're still coming out of this dreadful pandemic, and planning for international travel can be a little difficult, but we know that Ray has fans worldwide who would love to see these models in person. And I know that's something that was important to Ray as well. He wanted fans to see the creature collection up close. He didn't just want them to be locked away forever and under lock and key. He wanted people to see them, to take inspiration for them, and I suppose to revisit the movies that had meant so much to him and to all of his fans and friends.
No, absolutely. You know, it needs to be a sort of a living, breathing exhibit in much the same way the films are. You know, the films are freely available now on different streaming services, as well as you can buy them on HD. So, you know, as much as those films and books are available, the collection is accessible now more than ever. And, you know, ultimately, we'd like to have our own permanent space for the collection. And in some point in the future, Connor, when we're very old men, we'll be saying, oh, I remember back in the day in 2021. Can you imagine back in those days before holographic Zoom? And we talked about having a permanent exhibit. Now we have it. So I can only guess how old I'll be. It'll be over 100 anyway. But that's the plan, isn't it, Connor, for the future?
Yes, and I think that's definitely part of our medium to long-term plans is one day a dedicated Ray Harryhausen museum where you'll be able to see the creatures, which is important, but also see these other aspects of his life and all of these incredible things that he kept, which were important to Ray, which are important to his family, which give you an insight into what drove Ray and what kind of man he was. Of course, a very generous and a very humble man. And I certainly hope, and I'm sure that he would have been delighted by the amount of attention that his work is still receiving in the year 2021.
He would. And, I discussed Ray with the Facebook account and Twitter, and we first set those up. I showed them how they worked. And, if you want to follow us, we're on all the usual places. We're on Instagram now as well. Facebook, Twitter, there's our podcast, there's our YouTube channel. There's very little that we're not doing in the social media kind of world. And I guess probably the best thing, Connor, is if we leave it to Ray Harryhausen now to sign us off. And thanks to everyone for watching us here, Comic-Con at Home in 2021.
The simple process of walking into a cinema one day changed my life completely. I grew fascinated with the fact that you could put on the screen inanimate objects such as stop-motion dinosaurs and give the illusion that they are alive. And that has always fascinated me, the art of movement, the art of bringing things to life.